thought my summer job would be the most boring part of my year. After finishing my second year of college, I needed money, and the Sea Breeze Hotel was hiring seasonal workers. It was an old beachfront hotel at the end of a wooden boardwalk, the kind of place tourists loved because it looked frozen in time. The building had been standing for more than a century. Salt from the ocean stained the windows. The wooden floors groaned under every step. At night, the wind coming off the water rattled the walls like invisible hands were trying to get inside. It felt old, too old. But the job came with a free room, so I accepted it without hesitation. On my first day, I was given a tour of the hotel. Everything seemed normal until I reached the fourth floor. At the far end of a long hallway stood a single door, room 417. The door looked older than every other door in the building. Its brass numbers were dark with age, and the wood around the frame seemed strangely worn. That was when I was given the only rule that mattered. Stay away from room 417. No explanation, no details, just the rule. At first, I assumed it was being renovated or used for storage, but as the days passed, I realized something strange. The room wasn't listed anywhere. It didn't appear on reservation schedules. It wasn't assigned to guests. Housekeeping never cleaned it. Maintenance never entered it. Officially, room 417 didn't exist. Yet every employee knew exactly where it was, and nobody wanted to talk about it. Whenever I mentioned the room, conversations ended immediately. The older workers always looked uncomfortable. One maintenance employee actually left the room the moment I asked about it. The secrecy only made me more curious. A week later, I was delivering towels to a guest on the fourth floor when I heard something unusual. Voices. The sound was coming from room 417. I stopped in the hallway and listened. At first, I thought a television had been left on, but the longer I listened, the stranger it became. There wasn't just one voice, there were dozens, men, women, children, all talking at once. The sound reminded me of a crowded party, yet there shouldn't have been anyone inside. The room was supposed to be empty. I stepped closer. The voices continued. Then I pressed my ear against the wood. The moment I touched the wood, everything stopped. Silence. Complete silence.
The hallway became so quiet that I could hear my own breathing. I stepped away. The voices immediately returned. Soft whispers drifted from the other side of the door. The feeling that washed over me was impossible to describe. It felt as though whoever was inside had noticed me listening. I hurried downstairs and tried to convince myself that I had imagined it. But over the next several nights it happened again and again. Every evening sounds emerged from the room, sometimes laughter, sometimes arguments, sometimes crying. Once I heard what sounded like someone screaming. No guests ever entered, no guests ever left, yet the room was never silent. Then something happened that completely destroyed any explanation I had. Late one night, I was carrying fresh sheets upstairs. As I reached the fourth floor, I froze. The door to room 417 was open, only slightly, just enough to reveal a narrow strip of darkness inside. My heart immediately began racing. The room was supposed to be locked. Nobody had a key, yet the door stood partially open. For several seconds, I simply stared. The hallway was empty. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. Then the door slowly began to move, not opening, closing, as though someone inside had gently pulled it shut. The latch clicked. The hallway became silent again. I dropped the sheets and ran downstairs. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I returned to the 4th floor. The door was closed, locked, exactly as it had always been. If I hadn't seen it myself, I would have thought it had never happened. My curiosity soon turned into obsession. I needed answers. One afternoon, I discovered an archive room behind the front desk. Inside were decades of old guest records. Thousands of names filled dusty ledgers stacked on wooden shelves. I spent hours searching. Eventually, I found references to room 417. The entries were strange. Some guests appeared multiple times over the years. Others had no departure dates. Several names appeared in records, but nowhere else. One entry caught my attention. A family of 4 had checked into room 417 decades earlier. There was no checkout date, no note, nothing. I searched online newspaper archives later that evening. The family had disappeared during their vacation. None of them were ever found. As I continued researching, I discovered more cases. Different years, different people, the same room, the same outcome. People entered the records, then vanished. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. That was the first moment I genuinely considered quitting. Unfortunately, things only became worse. A few nights later, I awoke shortly after 2 in the morning. Something had disturbed my sleep. At first, I wasn't sure what it was. Then I heard it again. 3 slow knocks. The sound echoed faintly through the building. I stepped into the hallway. The knocking continued, somewhere above me. I followed the sound up the stairs.
Floor after floor, until I reached the 4th floor. The hallway was dark. Moonlight spilled through the windows. The knocking stopped. Then another sound replaced it. A woman's voice, soft, weak, almost a whisper. The voice seemed to be coming from room 417. Every instinct told me to leave. Instead, I walked toward the door. The closer I got, the colder the air became. By the time I reached the room, my breath was visible. The voice whispered again. The sound seemed desperate. My hand reached for the doorknob. The metal felt freezing cold. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around. The hallway was empty. When I looked back, the door had opened several inches. No one had touched it. A darkness, deeper than ordinary darkness, waited inside. Whispers drifted from within. Dozens of voices speaking at once. I took a step backward. Suddenly, the door slammed shut. The impact shook the entire hallway. The sound echoed through the hotel. Then everything went silent. The next morning, I learned the truth, or at least part of it. Decades earlier, a long-term guest had occupied room 417. Nobody knew much about him. He kept to himself, rarely spoke, rarely left the room. Then, one night, guests reported hearing terrible screams. When employees opened the room, it was empty. The guest had vanished. After that night, strange things began happening. People disappeared. Almost every case somehow connected back to room 417. The hotel attempted to close the room permanently. The door was removed. The room was sealed. The numbering was changed. Nothing worked. The room always returned. Eventually, management adopted a simple rule. Ignore it. Never enter. Never investigate. Never show interest. Unfortunately, by then I had broken every one of those rules. That same evening, I returned to my room and found something waiting on my bed. An old leather guest book. I had never seen it before. The cover was damp, as though it had spent years underwater. Inside were hundreds of names, page after page, every missing guest connected to room 417. As I turned to the final page, my stomach dropped. There, written in fresh black ink, was my name, my full name. Below it was a room number, 417. Beneath that was a check-in date. It was today's date. The line for checkout remained blank. I packed my belongings immediately. I didn't care about the job anymore. I wanted out. I grabbed my bags and headed for the lobby. But the front doors wouldn't open. Every exit seemed impossible to unlock. Then the lights went out. The entire hotel plunged into darkness. A moment later, I heard the elevator bell ring somewhere nearby. The doors slid open. The cabin was empty. Only one button glowed. The number 4. I chose the stairs instead. That decision nearly cost me my life. When I reached the 4th floor, the hallway looked wrong, much longer than before. The windows showed no ocean, no moonlight, only darkness. At the very end stood room 417. Its door was wide open. Inside were people, dozens of them, men, women, children, all standing perfectly still. Their clothing came from different decades. Some looked like tourists from the 1970s. Others looked far more recent. The missing guests. Every face stared directly at me, and behind them stood something else, something impossibly tall. Its shape seemed to shift constantly. Its face changed every few seconds. One moment it resembled an elderly woman, the next a child, then a man, then someone else entirely. Hundreds of faces, hundreds of eyes, watching, waiting. A terrible realization hit me. The room wasn't haunted. The room was hungry. Every missing guest was still there, trapped, collected, part of whatever lived inside. The whispers grew louder. The darkness began spilling from the doorway. The figures slowly stepped forward. That was when I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. The hallway stretched endlessly behind me. The whispers followed, growing louder with every second. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I simply ran. Then suddenly, I crashed through a stairwell door. Bright sunlight hit my face. Warm sand pressed against my hands. I was lying on the beach outside the hotel. The morning sun hung above the ocean. The building behind me looked completely normal. No darkness, no strange hallway, nothing. I quit that day. I left town before sunset, and I never returned. A year later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched the hotel's website online. Everything looked normal. Tourists still stayed there. New photos had been uploaded. Then I noticed something hidden in the background of one image. A hallway, the 4th floor. At the far end stood room 417. The door was slightly open, and inside the darkness stood a single figure, a young hotel employee wearing the same uniform I had worn that summer. The figure was staring directly at the camera, and it had my face. And according to the hotel's guest records, he never checked out. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next nightmare waiting around the corner. And tell me in the comments, would you have opened room 417 or walked away the moment you heard the voices?